November 1st, 1943, 3:27 in the morning, 49 degrees north latitude, 31 degrees west longitude, mid-Atlantic. Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins gripped the rail of USS Borie's bridge as his lookout screamed contact reports into the darkness. A German submarine. Surfaced, 600 yards dead ahead. Closing fast. The destroyer's searchlight snapped on. Its beam carved through spray and fog until it found what Hutchins had been hunting for 3 months. U-405. Steel black hull riding high in 15-foot swells. Conning tower bristling with anti-aircraft guns. Deck gun crew scrambling to their stations. Hutchins gave the order his crew had been drilling for weeks. All ahead flank, hard right rudder, ram her. For most of World War II, destroyers fought submarines with depth charges and sonar. They dropped explosives over suspected positions. They listened for propeller beats through hydrophones. They hunted ghosts in deep water. But in 1943, something changed. American destroyer captains started making a decision that seemed insane to every rule of naval warfare. They began deliberately crashing their ships into enemy submarines. Steel against steel, bow against hull, momentum against pressure. And it worked. By the end of 1943, ramming had helped sink U-boats at a rate Germany could not replace. This is not the story you have heard about the Battle of the Atlantic. This is the story of how a 2,000-year-old tactic destroyed the most technologically advanced submarine fleet in history. The Atlantic in early 1943 belonged to the hunters. Admiral Karl Dönitz perfected the Wolfpack, 20 submarines converging on a single convoy, attacking at night when their black hulls vanished against dark water, moving faster on the surface than merchant ships could steam, torpedoes flashing silently through columns of freighters, explosions lighting the sky, men screaming in burning oil slicks, escort commanders chasing contacts that dissolved into empty ocean. March 1943 marked the bloodiest month of the war at sea. German submarines sank 120 Allied merchant ships. Nearly 700,000 tons of food, fuel, weapons, steel, all swallowed by the Atlantic. Britain's warehouses emptied week by week. Prime Minister Winston Churchill later admitted the submarine threat frightened him more than German bombs falling on London. In Liverpool's Western Approaches Command, officers stared at wall maps covered with red pins, each pin marking a sunken ship. The pins spread like wounds across convoy routes. Some analysts quietly warned Britain might starve by summer. If the killing continued at this pace, the war would end not with invasion but with surrender. The problem was simple. Destroyers could not get close enough to submarines that fought on the surface. Depth charges worked only against submerged targets. Guns could hit surfaced submarines, but U-boat commanders were learning to fight back with deck guns and anti-aircraft weapons. Torpedoes required perfect firing solutions, and submarines maneuvered too quickly. Sonar worked underwater but became useless once a U-boat surfaced. The technology gap was killing escort crews. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Then, in March 1943, the Royal Navy tried something desperate. HMS Harvester, a destroyer escorting convoy HX-229, picked up a contact. U-444 surfaced ahead, trying to maneuver for a torpedo shot. Her captain, Commander A. Tite, made a split-second decision. Instead of circling to drop depth charges or attempting a gun duel, he ordered his helmsman to steer directly for the submarine. Full speed. Harvester's bow smashed into U-444 with enough force to buckle steel, plating. The submarine's pressure hull crumpled. Her ballast tanks ruptured. Seawater flooded her control room. The U-boat began to sink, but the impact shattered Harvester's propellers. The destroyer drifted helpless in heavy seas, while U-444 slipped beneath the waves. The French corvette Aconite finished the submarine with depth charges. Then U-432 surfaced nearby and torpedoed the crippled Harvester. She went down with most of her crew. The Admiralty studied the action reports. 1 destroyer sunk, 1 submarine destroyed. But something in those reports caught attention. The ramming itself had worked. The impact had done catastrophic damage to the U-boat's pressure hull. More damage than depth charges. More damage than gunfire. The problem was not the tactic. The problem was that Harvester had been too fragile for the collision. She was a destroyer, built for speed and firepower. Her hull was thin. Her machinery delicate. 1 good hit and she broke. But what if they used ships built tougher? What if they used vessels designed to absorb punishment? The answer arrived in American shipyards. Destroyer escorts, smaller than fleet destroyers, slower, less heavily armed, but built with thicker hulls, redundant machinery, damage control systems designed for brutal close-quarters combat. The Americans were building them by the dozens. Cheap, fast to construct, purpose-built for one mission: kill submarines. By spring 1943, destroyer escorts began arriving in the Atlantic. Their crews trained for anti-submarine warfare, depth charge patterns, sonar operation, hedgehog mortar attacks. But some commanding officers began thinking about that Harvester report, about what happens when you hit a submarine with several thousand tons of steel moving at 20 knots. Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel commanded USS Buckley, a destroyer escort commissioned in April 1943, brand new, untested, her crew mostly reservists. Many had never been to sea before the war. Abel drilled them relentlessly, not just on weapons and sonar. He drilled them on damage control, on fighting fires, on shoring up bulkheads, on continuing the fight when everything went wrong. He told his executive officer he expected close combat, hand to hand if necessary, because in the Atlantic in 1943 you did not get to choose your battles. The battles chose you. On May 5, 1944, Buckley joined Task Group 2111, built around the escort carrier USS Block Island. Their mission: hunt U-boats between Cape Verde Islands and the Azores. Aircraft from Block Island would force submarines to dive or surface. The destroyers would finish them. Standard hunter-killer tactics. What happened 3 hours after midnight on May 6th would become anything but standard. Buckley's radar operator picked up a contact. Surface target. 8,000 yards. Moving slowly. Abel ordered general quarters. The destroyer escort accelerated toward the contact. Her 3-inch guns trained forward. Depth charge crews standing ready. At 600 yards, the searchlight snapped on. U-66. Surfaced. Conning tower ablaze from earlier air attacks. Deck gun crew trying to traverse their weapons. The submarine was dying but still dangerous. Abel made his decision in seconds. The range was too close for depth charges. The submarine was turning to ram Buckley. 2 ships on a collision course, 1 American destroyer escort, 1 German-type IXC submarine. Both captains choosing the same tactic, both betting their ships and crews on pure momentum. Metal screaming against metal. The oldest naval tactic in history about to play out with modern warships in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The 2 vessels collided at 3:29 a.m. Buckley's bow impaled U-66's forward deck. The submarine tried to pull free, but the ships were locked together. German sailors poured out of the burning conning tower. Some jumped into the water. Others climbed onto Buckley's bow. Weapons in hand, close-quarters combat erupted. American sailors grabbed anything they could use as weapons. Coffee mugs. Shell casings still hot from the guns. Knives. Fists. 1 gunner's mate shot a German sailor with his .45 pistol at point-blank range. Another American knocked a German overboard with a single punch. The chaos lasted 16 minutes. Then U-66 broke free and somehow made one more desperate charge. She rammed Buckley again, this time into the engine room. Both ships shuddered from impact. Then the submarine's bow dipped. Her stern rose, diesel fuel blazing across the water. She went down at 3:41 a.m., still burning, completely out of control. abandoned by her crew except for the captain who went down with his boat. Buckley drifted, her bow bent to port, holes in her engine room, flooding in multiple compartments. But she was afloat. Her crew began rescue operations. They pulled 36 German survivors from burning water, treated their wounds, gave them coffee and blankets. The ramming had worked. 1 U-boat destroyed, 1 destroyer escort damaged but operational. The tactic that sank Harvester had succeeded when applied with the right ship. Word spread through the Atlantic escort forces. Ramming worked, not as a desperation move, as a legitimate tactic when conditions aligned, when the range closed too tight for depth charges, when submarines surfaced to fight with deck guns, when you had the right ship and the right captain willing to bet everything on momentum. 6 months earlier, on November 1st, 1943, Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins had made the same calculation aboard USS Borie. Borie was a Clemson-class destroyer, old. Commissioned in 1920, she had steamed through the Black Sea and Mediterranean and Caribbean for 2 decades before the war. By 1943, she was obsolete. Slow compared to modern destroyers, lightly armoured, but she had been refitted with new radar and depth charges, and her crew had trained as submarine hunters under Captain Arnold Isbell's Task Group 2114, built around escort carrier USS Card. Hutchins was 30 years old, Naval Academy graduate who had resigned his commission before the war to return to Indiana. After Pearl Harbor, he rejoined as a reservist. By June 1943, he commanded Borie, the youngest destroyer captain in the Navy. His crew were mostly reservists like him, men who had been farmers and mechanics and teachers. Now they hunted submarines in the North Atlantic. On October 30th, 1943, Task Group 2114 departed Norfolk for submarine hunting grounds north of the Azores. The weather turned vicious, gales, 15-foot seas, visibility near zero, perfect conditions for U-boats to surface and recharge batteries. Their hydrophone operators could hear propellers through storm noise. Their commanders knew Allied aircraft could not fly in such weather. The ocean belonged to them in storms. November 1st, 01:53 hours. Borie's radar operator called out a contact. 8,000 yards. Surface target. Hutchins ordered the destroyer to close. At 2,800 yards, radar contact faded, but sonar picked up the submarine. U-405, a Type Sevice boat, one of the most successful classes Germany built. She carried 14 torpedoes, an 88mm deck gun, 6 20mm anti-aircraft cannons. Her commander was Korvettenkapitän Rolf Heinrich Hoppmann, 37 years old, veteran of all 7 of the submarine's war patrols. Well liked by his crew. Skilled in surface combat, Borie launched a spread of depth charges. The explosions forced U-405 to surface, probably forced, possibly damage to her diving planes or ballast tanks. Either way, she came up 400 yards ahead of Borie. Still in heavy seas, wind, howling, spray flying. Hutchins ordered his gunners to open fire. 4-inch guns, 20mm cannons, everything they had. The range was point blank. U-405 fired back. Her deck gun crew got their 88mm weapon into action. They aimed for Borie's waterline. One hit could flood the engine room, but Borie's 20mm gunners killed every exposed German sailor on the submarine's deck, cut them down before they could fire a shot. The deck gun fell silent, unmanned. U-405's anti-aircraft weapons kept firing, 6 20mm cannons hammering away. They hit Borie's forward engine room, scored hits near the bridge, but nothing critical. Hutchins saw his opportunity. The submarine was trying to turn, trying to bring her stern torpedo tube to bear. If she launched that torpedo at this range, Borie would die. Hutchins made his decision. The same decision Tite had made aboard Harvester, the same decision Able would make 6 months later, aboard Buckley. Hard left rudder, all ahead full. Ram. Borie surged forward, her bow aimed directly at U-405's conning tower. The submarine tried to ram Borie first, both ships accelerating toward each other. both captains betting everything on who struck first. At the last second, Hutchins backed his port engine, threw Borie's stern toward the submarine. The destroyer's bow missed the conning tower, but her depth charge projector smashed into U-405's hull. 3 depth charges set for 30 feet splashed into the water, bracketing the submarine. The explosions detonated directly beneath U-405. The submarine's stern stopped dead, lifted partially out of the water, then settled back 6 feet from Borie's starboard side. The two ships were parallel, close enough to throw a baseball from one deck to the other. Both crews staring at each other across a gap narrower than a ship's length. A 15-foot sea was running. Every wave lifted and dropped both vessels. Sometimes they drifted closer. Sometimes the gap widened. Neither ship could maneuver, neither crew willing to break off. Then the most bizarre surface engagement of the Atlantic War began. The ships were so close that Borie's 4-inch guns could not depress enough to hit the submarine. U-405's deck gun was unmanned and useless. Both vessels raked each other with 20mm fire and small arms. Germans on the conning tower shooting with Mauser rifles. Americans on the deck firing .45 pistols and Thompson submachine guns. One American sailor grabbed a shotgun and fired buckshot across the gap. Another threw empty shell casings like grenades. Borie's crew had virtually unlimited ammunition from the gun crews. They hurled hot brass at the Germans. Fire Controlman First Class Bob Maher watched from his station above the bridge. He saw a German officer try to man the deck gun, saw an American sailor shoot him with a rifle, saw another German sailor pull a knife and try to cut Borie's anchor cable, saw an American boatswain's mate shoot the German with his pistol. The range was so close you could see faces, could hear screams, could smell diesel fuel and gunpowder and blood. This continued for over an hour, both ships locked together in 15-foot seas, both crews fighting with whatever weapons they could grab. Then, something extraordinary happened. A massive wave lifted Borie's bow completely out of the water. The destroyer rode up over the submarine's foredeck. Borie's bow came down, straddling U-405. The two vessels were perpendicular now. Borie balanced on top of the submarine like a seesaw, Americans looking straight down at Germans. Germans staring up at the destroyer's hull passing overhead. Some crew members later said they could have walked from one ship to the other, could have jumped down onto the submarine's deck. The distance was measured in feet, not yards. One American sailor described looking into the eyes of a German submarine officer 3 feet below him. Seeing the man's expression shift from rage to fear to something like resignation. This was not modern warfare. This was hand-to-hand combat at sea. This was ramming in its purest form. Two crews trying to kill each other with knives and fists and anything else they could grab. The wave passed. Borie slid off the submarine. Both ships separated. U-405's commander somehow got his boat moving, tried to escape, tried to speed away into the darkness and storm. Hutchins chased. Borie could still make 27 knots. The submarine could do 17 on the surface. For the next 30 minutes, it became a running gun battle. Borie's searchlight pinning the submarine against dark water. 4-inch shells walking up the U-boat's hull. 20mm tracers lacing across her conning tower. The submarine fired back with her anti-aircraft weapons, hit Borie again and again, but could not land a killing blow. Then U-405 tried one, desperate maneuver. She turned hard to ram Borie on her starboard side. Hutchins countered. Hard left turn, backing port engine, throwing depth charges set for 30 feet. The pattern straddled the submarine again. Underwater explosions hammered her pressure hull. U-405's bow stopped 6 feet from Borie's starboard side. The two ships were alongside each other again, close enough to spit across the gap, both crews opening fire with every weapon they could bring to bear. Hutchins reported later in his action report, "We were impressed by the ruggedness and toughness of these boats. Even after ramming, even after depth charges at point-blank range, even after over an hour of continuous gunfire, U-405 was still fighting, still maneuvering, still trying to kill them. Finally, the submarine's commander made his last move. He tried to torpedo Borie with his stern tube. Hutchins saw it coming, ordered the searchlight shut off, hoping the submarine would try to escape in darkness. It worked. U-405 turned away and attempted to run. Borie pursued at 27 knots, searchlight blazing, guns firing. The chase lasted minutes. Then Borie's radar operator called out a new course. The submarine was circling back, trying to ram them bow to bow. Hutchins saw the silhouette emerging from spray and darkness. Massive black shape accelerating toward his ship. He ordered 3 depth charges dropped directly in front of the submarine, set for 30 feet. They detonated just as U-405 passed over them. The submarine's bow lifted clear of the water, settled back. Then the bow lifted again and kept rising. The stern went under first, then the conning tower. Then the entire boat sliding backward beneath the surface, going down by the stern. No survivors visible. The time was 02:57. The battle had lasted 64 minutes. Borie's crew began celebrating. They had just won the closest surface combat in modern naval history. They had rammed a submarine and survived. They had fought hand-to-hand with an enemy vessel and won. Then they looked at their own ship and realized they were dying too. The forward engine room was flooded, both engine rooms taking water, generator room flooded, steam lines broken, water lines ruptured, damage extended the full length of the starboard side underwater. The depth charges and ramming and gunfire had broken Borie's keel. She was coming apart. Hutchins tried to save her, tried everything. Pumps running at full capacity, crew shoring bulkheads, welders trying to seal holes while seawater poured in. For 10 hours, Borie stayed afloat, her crew fighting to keep her alive. Card sent other destroyers, sent tugs, sent anything that could help. But in heavy seas, with multiple hull breaches and broken machinery, Borie could not be saved. At dawn, Hutchins gave the order to abandon ship. Crew transferred to other vessels. Then, Borie's remaining crew scuttled her with a 500-pound bomb dropped by a TBF Avenger from Card. The bomb struck. Borie went down. The destroyer that killed U-405 died hours later from the same tactic that destroyed her enemy. Ramming worked. But it killed both ships. Hutchins and his crew survived. They were rescued. They were decorated. Task Group 2114 received a Presidential Unit citation for extraordinary performance during anti-submarine operations. Hutchins himself became a legend, the youngest destroyer captain who fought a U-boat to mutual destruction. But the lesson was clear. Ramming submarines worked as a killing tactic, but old destroyers could not survive the impact. The British had learned this lesson months earlier. HMS Hesperus rammed U-357 in December 1942, sank the submarine, then spent 3 months in dry dock for repairs. Damage was so extensive she barely made it back to port. HMS Harvester rammed U-444 in March 1943, destroyed the submarine, then got torpedoed while dead in the water with shattered propellers, went down with most of her crew. The Royal Navy officially discouraged ramming after these actions. Too much damage to lightly built destroyers, too high a risk of losing the escort ship. But the Americans kept building destroyer escorts, and destroyer escort captains kept ramming. Because destroyer escorts were different. They were built tougher, designed for close combat. Their hulls could take punishment that would break a fleet destroyer. And they were expendable in ways a fleet destroyer was not. America was building them faster than Germany could build submarines. If trading a destroyer escort for a U-boat cost both ships, that was a trade America could afford. Germany could not. The mathematics were brutal but simple. Germany started the war with 57 operational U-boats. By 1943, they had built hundreds more but also lost hundreds to Allied action. Training new crews took months. Building new submarines required steel and machinery that Germany desperately needed for tanks and aircraft. Every U-boat lost represented thousands of man-hours, millions of Reichsmarks, expertise that could not be replaced. Meanwhile, American shipyards launched new destroyer escorts every week. Mass production, standardized designs, crews trained in months, not years. If a destroyer escort rammed a U-boat and both sank, America lost a ship that could be replaced in 60 days. Germany lost a submarine that required 6 months to build and a crew that required a year to train properly. The exchange rate favored America, heavily. U-boat commanders began to fear surface combat. They had been trained to attack on the surface at night, moving faster than convoys, using darkness as cover, firing torpedoes and diving before escorts could react. But in 1943, the rules changed. New radar could detect surfaced submarines in complete darkness. Huff-duff direction finding could locate U-boats the moment they transmitted. Very long-range aircraft with searchlights and depth charges could attack in the mid-Atlantic gap where no Allied aircraft had operated before. And destroyer escorts with radar and aggressive captains started hunting submarines that surfaced to fight. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The statistics tell the story. In May 1943, Germany lost 41 U-boats, the highest monthly total of the war. Many to aircraft, many to destroyer depth charges, but an increasing number to surface combat, to gun battles at close range, to ramming, to destroyer escorts closing the distance and deliberately crashing into submarines at full speed. Admiral Karl Dönitz called May 1943 Black May, the month he lost the Battle of the Atlantic, the month Wolfpack tactics stopped working, the month submarines began dying faster than they could be built. Part of that change came from technology. Better radar, better sonar, Enigma code-breaking that let Allied convoys avoid Wolfpack concentrations. Aircraft with 10-centimeter radar that German warning receivers could not detect, but part came from doctrine, from destroyer captains willing to risk their ships in close combat, from crews trained to fight hand-to-hand if necessary, from the calculated decision that ramming a submarine was worth the damage to your own vessel. New Zealand proved the tactic worked even with small ships. On January 29, 1943, the minesweeping trawlers, Kiwi and Moa, engaged Japanese submarine Ione in shallow water off Guadalcanal. Both trawlers displaced 607 tons. The submarine displaced 2135 tons, more than 3 times larger, more heavily armed. But Kiwi rammed Ione repeatedly, hit her 4 times, drove her into shallow water where she grounded and was abandoned. A tiny minesweeper destroyed a fleet submarine through pure aggression and willingness to accept damage. The principle was ancient. Ramming had been central to naval warfare for thousands of years. Greek triremes used bronze rams. Roman galleys had reinforced beaks for crushing enemy hulls. Medieval galleys rammed. Renaissance warships rammed. In 1866, at the Battle of Lissa, the Austrian ironclad Erzherzog Ferdinand Max rammed and sank the Italian Re d'Italia. Naval architects in the late 19th century designed warships specifically for ramming, added underwater rams projecting from the bow, built reinforced bulkheads to absorb impact. Ramming remained viable tactics through the First World War. But in the Second World War, ramming had seemed obsolete. Modern warships fought with guns and torpedoes and aircraft. Combat happened at ranges measured in miles, not yards. The idea of deliberately crashing one ship into another seemed suicidal, until U-boats forced Allied navies to reconsider. Because submarines operated in a different tactical environment, they fought close, they surfaced unexpectedly, they maneuvered quickly in darkness. Sometimes the only way to kill them was to hit them with several thousand tons of steel. British anti-submarine specialist Captain Frederick John Walker used ramming repeatedly from December 1941 through the end of the war. His doctrine was simple. If a submarine surfaced within close range, ram it. Do not waste time circling for depth charges. Do not attempt a gun duel. Just ram. Drive your bow through its pressure hull and let physics do the killing. Walker's groups sank more U-boats than any other Royal Navy commander. Part of that success came from his willingness to damage his own ships to destroy the enemy. American destroyer escort crews learned similar lessons. USS Buckley survived ramming U-66, returned to port, got repaired, returned to combat. The damage was severe but not catastrophic. Bent bow, holes in the engine room, sheared propeller shaft. 3 months in a Boston shipyard fixed everything. Meanwhile, Germany lost U-66 permanently. Lost her experienced crew, lost the investment in training and equipment. The trade favoured America even with the repair costs. USS Borie did not survive ramming U-405, but Task Group 2114 sank multiple other U-boats during the same patrol. Losing Borie was acceptable because the group's mission succeeded. More submarines sunk than escort ships lost. That was the calculation. That was the strategy that won the Atlantic. Other navies adopted ramming when circumstances forced the decision. HMS Eastern rammed U-458 in August 1943, sank the submarine, survived with damage. HMS Sunflower rammed a U-boat during convoy ONS-5 in May 1943. The submarine broke in half. Sunflower needed repairs but stayed operational. HMS Campbelltown was deliberately rammed into the dock gates at Street Nazaire in March 1942. Not against a submarine, but the principle was identical. Use your ship as a weapon, accept the damage, achieve the mission. The tactic worked because submarines were fundamentally fragile. Their pressure hulls had to be thin enough for reasonable weight but strong enough to survive depth. The compromise made them vulnerable to impact damage. A destroyer bow moving at 20 knots carried enormous momentum. When that momentum struck a submarine's pressure hull, something had to give. Usually, the submarine. Ballast tanks ruptured. Pressure hull cracked. Control surfaces jammed. Even if the submarine stayed afloat initially, flooding and damage made diving impossible. A submarine that could not dive was a target. German submarine commanders knew this. They began avoiding surface combat when possible, diving immediately when radar detected, running submerged even when batteries were low, accepting reduced speed and operational range rather than risk a surface engagement with an aggressive destroyer escort. That caution reduced their effectiveness, slowed their attacks, gave convoys more time to maneuver, made wolfpack coordination harder. The fear of ramming changed U-boat doctrine. Japanese submarine commanders faced similar problems in the Pacific. American destroyers rammed when opportunities arose. USS O'Bannon fought Japanese submarine RO-34 with close-range gunfire and potatoes. Yes, potatoes. The crew threw potatoes at Japanese sailors on the conning tower. The Japanese thought the potatoes were grenades and dove for cover. O'Bannon used the confusion to maneuver for a ramming attack. The submarine dove before impact, but the tactic demonstrated how close-quarters aggression could force enemy submarines to break off. The Japanese destroyer Amagiri rammed PT-109 on August 2, 1943, in the Solomon Islands, different circumstances. A patrol boat, not a submarine, but the same principle. When closing speed made gunfire ineffective, ramming became the most reliable way to destroy an enemy vessel. Lieutenant John F. Kennedy and his crew survived only because PT-109's small size let some men jump clear before impact. The destroyer cut the patrol boat in half. Physics does not care about ship type. Momentum wins. By mid-1943, the pattern was clear. Ramming worked best with certain conditions. Close range, limited time for depth charge attacks. Surfaced or partially surfaced submarines. Calm enough seas that ships could maneuver. Damage-resistant escorts willing to accept hull damage. And captains aggressive enough to make split-second decisions. When all those factors aligned, ramming killed submarines more reliably than any other tactic. The cost was real. HMS Harvester went down. USS Borie went down. Other escorts suffered serious damage. Some spent months in repair yards. But the strategic calculus favoured the Allies. Every U-boat sunk was one fewer hunting convoys. Every submarine forced to dive was one fewer torpedo in the water. Every German crew killed was irreplaceable expertise lost. America and Britain could afford to lose destroyer escorts. Germany could not afford to lose U-boats. Admiral Dönitz understood this. After Black May, he withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic convoy routes. Admitted the ocean had become too dangerous. Tried new tactics. Acoustic torpedoes that homed on propeller noise. Schnorkel systems that let submarines recharge batteries while submerged. Heavier anti-aircraft armament for surface fighting. But nothing worked. Allied technology advanced faster. Allied production outpaced losses. And Allied destroyer captains kept ramming submarines whenever the opportunity arose. The numbers prove the strategy's success. In 1942, Germany sank 11.1 million tons of Allied shipping while losing 85 U-boats. In 1943, Allied losses dropped to 3.2 million tons, while Germany lost 236 U-boats. In 1944, Allied losses dropped further to 1.4 million tons, while Germany lost 216 U-boats. The exchange rate reversed completely. By 1944, for every Allied ship sunk, Germany lost one U-boat, an unsustainable rate. Part of that reversal came from ramming, not the majority. Most U-boats died from depth charges or aircraft or combination attacks, but ramming contributed to the larger strategic shift. It demonstrated Allied willingness to accept damage to destroy submarines. It forced U-boat commanders to be more cautious about surfacing. It proved that close-quarters aggression could defeat Germany's most advanced technology, and it created a psychological effect. German submariners began to fear surface combat, began to hesitate before engaging escorts. That hesitation cost precious seconds. Seconds that let convoys escape. Seconds that led to depth. Charge attacks. Seconds that killed U-boats. The tactic's effectiveness depended entirely on crew training and captain's judgment. Ramming required split-second timing. Too early, and the submarine dove before impact. Too late, and the submarine launched torpedoes. The approach had to be perfect, full speed but on exactly the right course. Bow aimed at the submarine's most vulnerable point, usually amidships where the pressure hull had least reinforcement. The helmsman had to hold steady despite gunfire and torpedoes and chaos. The captain had to judge distance and closing speed and wave action, all while making life-or-death decisions in seconds. American destroyer escort captains trained for this. They ran practice approaches, drilled damage control, prepared their crews for close combat. They studied action reports from Harvester and Borie and Buckley. They learned what worked and what killed. They understood they might lose their ships. They went anyway. Because that was the mission. Kill submarines, no matter the cost. British destroyer captains had similar training. Captain Walker's groups practiced coordinated ramming attacks. One destroyer would drive the submarine toward another destroyer, waiting to ram. Anvil and hammer tactics. The submarine had nowhere to maneuver. Either way led to impact. Walker's groups sank U-boats at rates that terrified German commanders. His willingness to risk his ships made him the most feared anti-submarine commander in the Royal Navy. The weapons themselves were simple. A destroyer bow was just steel, no explosives, no guidance system, no complicated machinery, just mass and velocity. But applied correctly, that was enough. A 2,000-ton destroyer escort at 20 knots carried roughly 12,000-ton knots of momentum, concentrated into a relatively small impact area where the bow struck the submarine. The pressure hull had to absorb that energy. Steel bent, welds fractured, seams split, the submarine flooded. Usually, fast enough that crew could not save her. German submarine designers knew this vulnerability. They could not fix it without making submarines heavier. Heavier submarines dove slower and operated at shallower depths and consumed more fuel. The compromise was unavoidable. So submarines remained fragile against ramming, and ramming remained effective against submarines. The human cost was significant. Borie lost 27 crew when she went down. Harvester lost most of her crew. Other escort ships that survived ramming still lost men to gunfire and explosions and flooding. German submariners died by the thousands, trapped in sinking pressure hulls, drowned in burning oil, cut down by machine guns during surface battles. The close-quarters nature of ramming attacks made casualties inevitable on both sides. But wars are not won by minimizing casualties. Wars are won by achieving objectives. The objective in the Atlantic was protecting convoys, sinking U-boats, keeping supply lines open. Ramming contributed to that objective. Therefore, ramming was correct tactics regardless of cost. The mathematics were brutal but accurate. As long as more U-boats sank than escort ships, the strategy worked. And more U-boats sank. Many more. By 1944, ramming had become routine enough that action reports barely mentioned it. Destroyer escort rams submarine. Submarine sinks. Destroyer escort proceeds to convoy. The extraordinary became ordinary. The desperate tactic became standard procedure. Captains rammed when tactically appropriate. Crews accepted the risk. Naval architects designed new destroyer escorts with reinforced bows specifically for ramming. The entire system adapted to make ramming more effective and less damaging to Allied ships. Germany adapted too, but could not match Allied production. They built stronger U-boats, heavier armor on conning towers, better damage control systems, faster diving times. But nothing helped. The pressure hull remained vulnerable. The need to surface for battery charging remained. The exposure to radar detection remained, and Allied destroyers remained willing to ram. Technology could not fix the fundamental problem. Submarines operating on the surface were vulnerable to ships willing to crash into them. The psychological dimension mattered as much as the physical. German submarine crews in 1944 faced a different ocean than crews in 1942. Earlier in the war, they hunted convoys confidently, surfaced at night without fear, attacked aggressively. By 1944, they operated with constant anxiety. Every radar contact might be a destroyer. Every surface transit might end with guns firing and bow waves approaching. Every patrol became a mission of survival rather than hunting. That fear reduced effectiveness, made crews hesitant, led to missed opportunities and early dives and abandoned attacks. American destroyer escort crews felt the opposite shift. Early in the war, they feared U-boats, feared the invisible hunter that could torpedo you without warning. By 1944, they were the hunters. They had radar and sonar and huff-duff. They had aircraft overhead. They had experienced captains and trained crews. And they had the knowledge that in close combat they could ram submarines and survive. That confidence made them aggressive, made them push harder, made them take risks that killed U-boats. The Battle of the Atlantic ended not with a single decisive battle, but with accumulation of small victories. Each convoy that arrived safely, each U-boat sunk, each German crew lost, each month that Allied production exceeded German submarine construction. Ramming contributed to that accumulation, not as the decisive factor, but as one tool among many. Depth charges killed more submarines, aircraft killed more submarines, but ramming killed enough to matter, killed enough to change German tactics, killed enough to help win the ocean. The legacy of ramming in World War II remains largely forgotten. Popular history focuses on depth charge attacks and aircraft kills and convoy battles. Few people know destroyer escorts deliberately crashed into submarines. Fewer know how effective the tactic was, but the participants remembered, the crews who rammed U-boats and survived, the sailors who fought hand-to-hand on pitching decks in Atlantic storms. They knew what happened. They knew ramming worked. Klaus Herbig of U-66 spent decades after the war telling anyone who would listen about the night Buckley rammed his submarine, about how close-quarters combat felt more like medieval warfare than modern technology, about how American sailors fought with coffee cups and fists and determination. He attended reunions with Buckley survivors, thanked them for saving his life after the ramming. The two sides who had tried to kill each other became friends, united by the shared experience of the most intense naval combat imaginable. Lieutenant Commander Hutchins never forgot his 64 minutes fighting U-405. He described watching his ship die hours after winning the battle. Described the moment he realized Borie could not be saved. Described ordering his crew to abandon ship and watching her go down. He received decorations, received promotion, but always called Borie's crew the real heroes. The reservists who fought a German submarine to mutual destruction and saved their shipmates. Lieutenant Commander Abel continued in the Navy after the war, rose to higher command. But Buckley remained his defining moment. The night his destroyer escort rammed U-66, the hand-to-hand combat on his bow, the rescue of German survivors from burning water. He attended reunions with survivors from both sides, spoke about fair treatment of prisoners, about following rules even in brutal combat, about proving through actions what American values meant. The destroyer escorts themselves mostly disappeared after the war, decommissioned, scrapped, sold to other navies. Few survive as museum ships. Their contributions largely forgotten by historians who focus on fleet carriers and battleships. But in 1943 and 1944, they were the most important warships in the American Navy. They protected convoys. They hunted submarines. They rammed U-boats. They won the Atlantic. Germany lost 785 U-boats during the war. Nearly 30,000 submariners died, a 75% casualty rate, higher than any other branch of any service in any country. The U-boat force was annihilated. Some submarines surrendered, some were scuttled, but most went down fighting. Destroyed by depth charges and aircraft and ramming attacks, destroyed by escort crews willing to risk everything to protect convoys. The final statistic tells the story completely. In 1942, Germany sank more merchant shipping than America could build. In 1943, Allied production exceeded losses. In 1944, Allied shipyards launched 11 million tons of merchant shipping. Germany sank less than 2 million tons. The balance had reversed completely, not because of any single weapon or tactic, but because of accumulation, radar and sonar and code breaking and aircraft and aggressive escort tactics and yes-ramming, all combined into a system that killed U-boats faster than Germany could replace them. Ramming was one piece of that system, not the largest piece, not the most glamorous, but essential, because ramming proved something important. Proved Allied destroyer crews would accept damage to kill submarines. Proved close-quarters combat favoured aggression over caution. Proved old tactics still worked against modern technology. And proved the human factor mattered more than weapons. Because ramming required courage, required split-second decisions, required crews willing to fight hand-to-hand if necessary. Technology could not replicate that. Training could. Improve it, but not create it. That came from the individuals, the Hutchins and Abels and Walkers, the captains who ordered ramming attacks knowing the cost, the crews who executed those orders without hesitation. The Germans respected this. Even while losing, German submarine veterans after the war spoke about Allied escort crews with admiration, not affection. These were enemies who killed thousands of German sailors, but respect for professionalism, for determination, for willingness to close the distance and fight with everything available, including the ship itself, as a weapon. That respect came from experience, from being on the receiving end of ramming attacks, from watching destroyer bows coming out of darkness faster than torpedoes could reload, from knowing the next wave might bring impact and flooding and death. U-boat commanders who survived the war universally described 1943 as the turning point, the year the ocean changed from hunting ground to death trap. Technology contributed, better radar, better sonar, better aircraft, but also tactics, aggressive convoy escorts, hunter-killer groups, surface combat at close range, ramming, all the things that made surfacing dangerous and diving urgent and operating terrifying. By 1944, experienced U-boat commanders were rare. Most had been killed. Replacements were undertrained. Kids sent to sea with obsolete doctrine and doomed boats. They died in hundreds, killed by the system that ramming helped create. The lesson transcends World War II. Naval warfare evolves. Technology changes. But certain principles remain constant. Aggression matters. Willingness to close with the enemy matters. Training and leadership matter more than weapons. A well-commanded destroyer with obsolete equipment can defeat a poorly commanded submarine with modern torpedoes. Because combat is not about technology alone. Combat is about humans making decisions under pressure, about captains choosing to ram instead of withdraw, about crews fighting with coffee cups when ammunition runs low, about determination and courage and acceptance of risk. Modern navies study these battles, study the ramming attacks. Not because ramming remains relevant tactics in an era of guided missiles and nuclear submarines, but because the human factors remain relevant. The need for aggressive leadership, the importance of training for close combat, the value of crews willing to improvise. Those lessons apply regardless of technology. Those lessons won the Atlantic in 1943. Those lessons remain valid today. May 6, 1944. USS Borie rammed U-66 in the pre-dawn darkness. The ships locked together. Crews fought hand to hand. The submarine went down. The destroyer escort survived. Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel made the decision in seconds, saw the submarine turning to ram him, turned to ram first. Won by speed and timing and courage. 36 German survivors spent the rest of the war as prisoners, treated fairly, fed properly, sent home after 1945 to rebuild Germany. One of them, Klaus Herbig, spent 43 years remembering that night, remembering American sailors who pulled him from burning water after trying to kill him, remembering the destroyer escort that rammed his submarine and changed his life. November 1st, 1943. USS Borie rammed U-405 in heavy seas. The ships fought for over an hour, balanced on top of each other in 15-foot waves, crews shooting with rifles and pistols across gaps measured in feet. Both ships died, both went down, but Borie's crew survived, rescued by other destroyers. Decorated for extraordinary courage. Their captain, Lieutenant Commander Charles Hutchins, remembered them forever. The reservists who fought a 64-minute battle that ended with mutual destruction and mutual respect, these stories matter. Not because ramming was decisive, but because ramming demonstrated something fundamental. Demonstrated that humans matter more than machines, that courage and leadership and determination can overcome technological disadvantage, that old tactics adapted for new circumstances can defeat modern weapons, that wars are won by individuals making hard decisions under impossible pressure. That principle never changes. That principle won the Atlantic. That principle still matters today. Why US destroyers started ramming U-boats in 1943? Because it worked. Because the alternatives were worse. Because German submarines were killing convoys faster than depth charges could stop them. Because aggressive captains found a tactic that killed submarines reliably even at cost to their own ships. Because America could afford to trade destroyer escorts for U-boats, and Germany could not afford the reverse. Because physics does not care about modern technology. Because momentum wins regardless of era. Because sometimes the oldest tactics work better than the newest weapons. The ocean remembers. Every wreck on the bottom. Every destroyer escort that rammed and sank. Every submarine broken by impact. Every crew that died fighting. The wrecks remain. Monuments to courage. To determination. To the brutal calculus of naval warfare. To the humans who chose close combat over caution. To the captains who ordered ramming attacks. To the crews who executed them. The ocean keeps their stories. We should too. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.